Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first lecture of CS 188, Artificial Intelligence. So we have two instructors for the class. I am Pieter Abbeel. I'm a professor here at Berkeley. Aside from teaching, I do research in machine learning and robotics in my very non-extensive spare time. I also try to play some tennis or go running.
Hi, I'm Dan Klein, and I'm really loud. I'm Dan Klein. I'm a 14th year professor here at Berkeley, and I work on natural language processing. And in my equally extensive free times, I like to do a lot of things, but I'm really into science fiction and video games and all kinds of things I wish I had more time for, but we'll see a little bit of in this class. And we have a very, very small core staff here. And I'm going to introduce them, and GSIs, if you could please sort of like wave your hands or jump up and down or do some webcast-appropriate activity, that'd be great. We have Aditya, Alex, Daniel, David, Ignacy, Jasmine, Jonathan, Katie, Laura, Mitchell, Nikhil, Nikita, Noah, Ronghang, Tanard, Wilson, and Yi. So we're really looking forward to getting to know you and letting you get to know us. We're going to be your core staff, and we're going to enjoy getting to do 188 with you this semester. I'll give it to Pieter for a little bit.
All right, so let's start with a few logistical things. There's a website which went up last night. It's at this URL. Check it out. A lot of the information you need for the course is on that website. And if it looks like what you see on the slide, you're probably in the right place. Communication. There's a website for us to broadcast things to you. There's also announcements on Piazza, which will be our main forum for communication. If you have any questions, ask them on Piazza. You can ask them publicly if you think other students would benefit from the answer too. You can ask them privately if you think it's something more appropriate for just the course staff. And if you think even that doesn't work, you can email us at the email address listed above. Course technology, we're going to use a few things. There's the website, there's Piazza, and there's also Gradescope. For Piazza and Gradescope, you need to make accounts. If you don't have accounts yet, it'll be important to make accounts so you can, for Piazza, participate in communication, and Gradescope, submit work. The course is also webcast. So if you miss a lecture or you want to rewatch this whole thing or something, you can do that online. This is orchestrated by campus, so we don't control exactly when these things come online, but usually it comes online relatively soon after lecture. We also have some edited videos. So a couple years ago, we had some GSIs slice and dice lecture videos to cut out any like quiet spots and make a lecture that normally is an hour and 20 minutes into an hour and 2 minutes. And so we'll post those too in case you want to watch some of these things slightly faster. Okay, prereqs. Often it's been listed as CS61A or CS61B and CS70 or Math 55. If you can parse that, you're probably in good shape. What we actually recommend is much simpler to parse, 61A and 61B and 70. There'll be a lot of math, mostly in the second half of the course, and a bunch of programming. But keep in mind, this is not a programming class. This is programming to put things into practice that you see in lecture rather than learning to program like you would do in the 61 series. Work and grading. There are 5 programming projects. They're all in Python. You can either work in a group of just yourself or a group of 2. You get 5 late days as a budget for the entire semester, but you can use at most 2 for any given project. So anything comes up, you're sick for a day, whatever, somebody needs your attention and you can't work on the project, just use a late day. No need to contact us for these. You use that budget whatever way you'd like to, but it's capped at 5 total. There are 11 homework assignments. Each homework will have an electronic part and a written part. Electronic, you work online. It's on Gradescope. You get to interactively solve these things. Gradescope will show you if you got it right or wrong. You can keep working on it till you get it right. You can work alone. You can work in discussion with others, but you have to submit your own work and your own understanding of that work. There's a written component. This will be typically on paper. I mean, you can do it on a computer or print it out and do it on paper. Then you'll upload it into Gradescope. The way you'll solve it is you'll either work alone or in groups, but you still have to write up your own solution and submit your own work into the submission. Then there'll be a deadline a week later to self-assess your work on the previous homework. So you'll first work through it, and then submit, and then a week later another deadline to compare your solution with our solution, and you'll be asked to describe the differences. Written homework will be graded based on completion and effort. So if you put in the effort and complete it, and then also self-assess properly, you will get a full grade, independent of exactly how accurately you solved everything in the first pass. There'll be 2 midterms, 1 final. We're using a fixed scale. What this means is that in principle, you could all have an A or an A+ at the end of the semester. Historically speaking, that is not what happens. So don't count on that, but we're not going to curve you. If you happen to be this exceptional year where everybody is just as good as the A+ students of last year, no problem, then that's what it is. Participation can help on the margins. So we love for you to participate on Piazza, help out in discussion, and if at grade decision time we see somebody is close to the margin, we'll go check and see, okay, did they help other students in the class? And if so, maybe we'll bump them up just a little. Academic integrity policy. Okay, hopefully we don't have to say much about this. It's the only time this has to come up in this course. What it boils down to is don't represent anybody else's work as if it's your own. Okay, that's essentially it. You can go read more details on the website, but that's what it comes down to. There are also contests. So throughout the course, about 3 times, and then at the end of the semester, we'll have a final contest where you get to compete, submit your AIs to compete with other people's AIs and see how they fare. This competition will not determine grades. It is for glory, honor, and so forth, which you should try to always get, but it would not affect your grades directly. Okay, so exams. There will be 3 exams total, 2 midterms, 1 final. These are the dates. These are the times. Put this in your calendar. There is no alternative. That's it. Discussion sections. Right now, none of you are assigned to any particular discussion section. There are many, many, many discussion sections. You are welcome to attend any one of them that you like. You can go many times if you want. Maybe you go to all, 20 discussion sections. It's not recommended to do that, but you can. There's a survey later this week where you can annotate your preferences. And that'll go out, watch Piazza, annotate your preferences, and that'll help us balance who goes where, because you'll see ahead of time whether a section is going to be overcrowded or not, and can adjust accordingly. Bear with us. Usually the first 2 weeks, these things are overcrowded, but this will be less so as a couple of weeks have passed by. For a section, we'll also have a webcast. One of the GSIs will work through the problems that are covered in section and then provide a webcast by the end of the week. No section this week. It'll start next week. Okay, textbooks. Who here has bought a textbook this semester? Raise of hands. Okay, still a good fraction of people buying textbooks. Okay, not too many though. So there is no required textbook for the class. But if you like to have a textbook and you like to read more, this is the textbook we recommend. Keep in mind that we're not following exactly the way things are explained in this textbook, but it is a good book if you want to read more. Laptops in lecture. So one thing that can happen with laptops in lecture is that the students behind you are kind of curious what's on your screen and is distractive for them. And so if you love using laptops in lecture, try to sit a little bit to the sides or to the back so you're not a cause of distraction for the other students around you. It also turns out the laptop can distract the person using the laptop, but that's more up to you to decide what you want to do. Okay, let's recap the announcements for this week. You need to go check out the website, register on Gradescope and Piazza. Homework 0 is out. It's a math self-diagnostic. It's a way to check whether you're mathematically prepared for the second half of the course. Okay? And so it's important to do now because by the time we hit the second half, it's kind of too late to decide whether or not you were prepared for the second half of the course. P0 is a Python tutorial to get you going with our autograders and just the general environment we'll be working in. There will be lab hours for this on Friday, especially if you happen to have trouble getting your Python environment set up or you want to use the lab machines, go to those office hours and you'll be helped out. You don't need an instructional account, but if you want one, there are instructions on Piazza how you can get one. Also important is that sections will be pretty loosely assigned, so stay tuned on that. We'll start next week. There is still a wait list. Have some patience. Hopefully this will sort itself out. We think it's likely everybody will make it in, but it's never sure. While you're still on the wait list, make sure you do all the work for the class. Otherwise, well, you'll have missed a lot of work and have missed a lot of points by the time you join. Okay, so that's it. That's all for logistics. Any questions about logistics? Great. Then we want to do a quick thing about the culture we're interested in having in this class and how we see the class. And not every class is the same in this way, so we'd like to take just a little bit of time to get this across. Any class has to kind of do a combination of instruction and assessment. Instruction for people to learn, and assessment to then measure what people learned. Instruction, in our mind, means you grow knowledge, you get to collaborate, even if you still have to, of course, submit your own work, and you get to keep working till you're successful. And so that's just iterating on things. Assessment is very different. It's where you just get an opportunity to show what your current state of your mind is on this topic that we're teaching you, and we'll measure how good that is. You might be stopped before you're successful at solving everything. In our experience, these two don't mix very well. Like something has to be either instruction or assessment. It can't really be both at the same time. And so in this class, lecture, section, office hours, Piazza, homework, projects, those are all instruction. They're all entities where you would be learning, get to discuss everything that's covered in them, get to keep working till you complete it. For projects, you'll know from the autograder whether you completed and have full grade or not. Same for electronic homework. For written homework, you get to make corrections the week after to whatever you didn't have. So all of these are for you to work till completion and get full grade on if you put in the effort. Exams are the place where assessment happens. And so that's just what we need to do to still have some assessment in here. And you're on your own. So some historical statistics on the consequences of this kind of course structure. So the reason we like to do it is because this way we can be in everything together except for exams where everybody has to do their own thing. But then historically what you might see happen is homework and projects. You might work alone or together, iterate till you've learned it and nailed it. And this is what the histogram looks like for grades. So pretty much everybody nails it. And then we're like 4 or 5 weeks into the semester. Everybody's looking at like fixed scale grading, like I'm 100% till now. This is looking great. Oh my God, all of us going to get A+ in this class. Then the exam comes in. And this is a real histogram from recent offering. And this is what it looks like. So we just want you to be prepared for this. And the reason is that it's very different to be working on your own than to be working in a group and getting to discuss everything and get as much time as you might ever want to work on it. So we have a few suggestions for this. First of all, there's a new component this year, the written homework, which allows you to emulate exam situation on your own. So when you work on a written, you're free to discuss from the beginning, but what we would recommend you do is you take a half hour, an hour to just work on the written alone. Assess yourself. And based on that, you can see where you're at. should you study some more or not for this class? And then you go discuss, make sure you solve everything and so forth and learn all the material. Okay, so that's all for logistics and class organization. Dan, giving it back to you.
Any questions about any of that? All right, we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about what artificial intelligence actually is. What can AI do? What can AI not do? What's the difference between what we think is possible and what actually is possible? And then we're going to talk about what is this course? What have all of you gotten yourselves into before it's too late? So one good way to see what people are thinking and dreaming about technology, and in particular artificial intelligence, is to look at things like science fiction. And see, it's basically sort of a story of an interplay and arc between hope and fear. So let's do a little pop culture quiz here. Tell me if you recognize any of this stuff. You know who these are? Okay, good. This is the 70s, right? They appeared in the 70s. Who's the big gold one? C-3PO. Good. You passed your first 188 point. What does C-3PO do? Translator. Google Translate. With anxiety, right? So, we haven't completely been able to build C-3PO, but, Google Translate works pretty well. We can translate between human languages, so we got that. How about the other guy? The trash can. Who's that? What does R2-D2 do? Silence. Yeah, I don't actually know. He's sort of spunky and does a little bit of everything. In AI, we don't yet know how to make things that are spunky, and actually, much more importantly, we don't actually know how to build AI systems that do a little bit of everything. We know how to build systems that do one thing very well if they have enough data, if they have enough compute, and that's something that'll show up a lot in this course. But fundamentally, this is the 70s, and when in the 70s we think about AI and what that kind of technology could mean for the future, it's sort of optimistic, right? These are helpful droids, right? They help us do things, they take some work off our hands, and they make our lives better. Sometimes they complain a lot. But then let's fast forward a little bit. What was going on in the movies in the 80s? Killer robots from the future. It's getting a little darker. If you actually look at it, these Terminators look a lot like C-3PO, right? The difference here is the software. I mean, I guess the eyes glow red, and that's kind of scary, and it's got actually teeth. That's terrifying. I've never seen that before. Anyway, in the 80s, we started worrying about hardware. Maybe hardware could be scary. Maybe this technology that we're building could turn against us, right? In the 90s, we realized that software can be scary. Software can be very scary. And in fact, that's the difference between the hardware. And so you can see here, we're sort of moving from hope that this technology can make our lives better to what if it doesn't? What if the technology is dangerous? What if the robots come for us, right? 2000s. What's that? Cylons, Battlestar Galactica. So what's the worry here? Well, we're sort of shifting now from worrying that the AIs will sort of defeat us or rise up to sort of a little bit more of a subtle worry. What if we can't tell the difference? What if they're indistinguishable from us? And that's a very different kind of worry. What if we get replaced? The fear here is not so much about, a war, but a replacement. Although I guess it's basically a war there too. And let's look at today. What's that? Westworld. What to say about Westworld? So Westworld, today I think our views on technology are complex. And so is Westworld. So here we have a little bit of wouldn't it be lovely actually if we could build systems which were indistinguishable from humans? Or maybe that would be bad, and maybe they'd rise up. But maybe that'd be okay, because maybe they'd actually be better than us. I don't know. Anyway, there's this complex interplay between what we hope, the ways that technology could make us better, and what we fear, things that could go wrong along the way. And that's something that we have to keep in mind as we think about these technologies. But we also need a sort of reality check about where we are and what we can and can't do. So let's switch from science fiction and how we're thinking about the future to what's in the news. So it used to be that science fiction writers were the ones who got to think about what is AI going to do and how could it change the world. But now everyday reporters get to watch developments and think about what's happening right now and how can we communicate that to society. So you've probably seen a lot of these things in the news. What's this? This is IBM's Watson. It was inconceivable 30 years ago that we would have a system that could, like a computer AI system that could beat humans at Jeopardy. It was maybe also inconceivable that we would try. This is probably the most complicated way to make $77,000 using AI technology. But it's actually sort of amazing, and it's sort of emblematic of what you can do when you combine computation on top of data accessing sort of all of these things that we have written down out there on the web in databases, and computation to kind of connect that up and do reasoning to figure out how to answer these questions, reason about confidences, and so on. Really cool thing. You probably saw the headlines about Go, right? Games have sort of been falling one by one. We'll talk about games a little bit more later in this lecture. But this is an example of, I think, a real triumph. For a long time, things like chess and checkers were games that we could play very well, and we understood very well how to play. But Go was something that was very hard to make progress on with AI methods. And a combination of modern methods that we'll talk about later today and later in this course were able to make a really big breakthrough. And so you probably also saw that. That's sort of amazing. There's all these things that you see in the news that we can do, but there's a lot of things we can't do. There are things that are hard, where maybe we're making progress, but we're not there yet. So, for example, automated driving, autonomous driving. It's amazing what we can do with autonomous vehicles right now, but we're not there yet, right? To go back to science fiction, we do not yet have KITT, if you remember Knight Rider from the 70s, right? We can't do that yet. We'll talk a little bit more, actually a lot more about autonomous driving later in this lecture and in this course. These are things we're able to do to varying degrees, which I think have been amazing and in the news, but people are also starting to take these accomplishments and think about what this means for the future. So for example, people are starting to look and say, all right, well, maybe we can totally change how we do healthcare. But maybe there's issues with that. Maybe there's some things we can do that we shouldn't, or we should think through before we cross some of these technological lines. Or maybe not just AI raises questions of things that we can do but maybe shouldn't. Maybe there are existential questions. So famously, Elon Musk is worried that the biggest risk we face as a civilization is actually artificial intelligence. What if this stuff works? What if it works really well? What if it doesn't do what we expect or what we want? How do we define what we want and how to keep these things safe? And it's not just Elon Musk. Stephen Hawking famously said that he feared that AI could replace humans altogether. And you can start to see in these sort of forward-looking worries starting to reflect what you see in the movies. What if AI kind of ruins our civilization, right? Either in a spectacular or a subtle way. What if humans get replaced? What's this future going to look like? But one thing we're going to have to think through in this class is not only the ethics of these issues, but also where are we? Where are the places where AI is really doing amazingly well, and where are the places where we really sort of don't know? So just as a cute example of something that AI is not going to replace humans anytime soon, I don't know if you know much about paint. Yeah, I'm actually going to talk about paint. So when you have colors of paint, people name these colors of paint very carefully. This is island fog, right? And it's some kind of like blue or something. Well, in a very cute experiment, a whole bunch of data about paints and RGB values was fed into a neural net, right? Can neural nets do everything? Well, they can't do this yet. It was fed into a neural net. And new colors, new RGB values were input to the network, and the network was asked to generate names for paint. Now, you tell me whether you are ready to replace the humans that name paint. Here's some paint names. Clardic Fug. My favorite is Bank Butt. Maybe when the Terminators come for us, Skynet will paint them Bank Butt. So really, there's a huge range of things we can't really even do. We don't know how to do them, or we don't have the sort of data necessary to do them or the methods, to things that we can do amazingly well that have real impact on our society today and are going to have increasing impact. And one of the things we're going to try to do in this course is sort of tease these things apart. What's the difference between what we can do, what we can't do? What are the big ideas that are going to keep recurring as we go through generation after generation of solving things, hitting walls, breaking through those walls, and advancing this technology? So what is AI, right? Actually, famously, AI is a self-defeating definition, because if you say, well, AI, that's all those things that require human intelligence, and then as soon as you can do them, well, apparently they don't require human intelligence, and AI is sort of famous at not sort of claiming things, like search, for example, I think has a big AI component, but once we think of something as technologized or solved, sometimes you don't think about it as AI anymore. But let's take a step back and think about how should we define AI? And there have been multiple historical answers that I think it's important to understand, both to understand the history of how we've gotten here, and also all the different fields that orbit each other sort of in the AI sphere, and how they relate to each other. So the oldest answer of what is AI is it's the science of making machines that think rationally. For now, let's take that to mean think correctly. And this is the logicist tradition. This goes back to Plato and Aristotle and things like modus ponens, figuring out what are the rules that govern correct thought. If we have rules that govern correct thought, we can automate that, and we can turn those logical rules into theorem provers and deduction systems, and thereby turn computation into reasoning and thereby behavior. So this is the oldest approach. This is basically what drove AI early on. For example, in the 80s, most of the methods were based on this idea of thinking in a correct way, and this didn't scale. Right? There were some things missing from that approach, and people moved from trying to kind of think in the right way to maybe trying to do other approaches. Another approach that has come up a lot historically is building machines that think like people. This really isn't so much AI anymore. This is actually more connected to cognitive science. This is trying to figure out what's going on in our heads. What are these thought processes that our brains do? This is actually really important to AI because we have exactly one general purpose intelligence system. It's in all of your heads. And usually when we have an existence proof of a technology, we can reverse engineer it. Hasn't been so easy. Part of that is we don't really know yet what goes on inside our minds. But it turns out it doesn't actually matter that systems think in exactly a certain way. And we'll see this as soon as later in this lecture, that it became less and less important what exactly the process of reasoning was than the outcome and the action. For example, when we talk about chess playing systems, they work very differently than humans, but they come up with similar moves. So people decided that maybe we should be building systems not based on how they think, but how they act. This is actually a very important change from thought processes to underlying to the resulting actions. And who's heard of the Turing test? Very famous initial AI idea from Alan Turing, which says one way to tell intelligence is to put a computer in one room and a human in another room and have a human talk, presumably by typewriter, to both entities and see if you can tell them apart. And if they're sort of functionally equivalent, well, you've achieved something. Maybe you've achieved intelligence, or maybe you've just achieved human bluffability. Maybe that's like intelligence, maybe it was not. It's a very influential kind of philosophy of mind idea of the Turing test, but the research that came out of it tended to kind of be driven by the kinds of things that can fool people in the short run. So very important in any Turing test. Don't spell too well, don't type too quickly. When somebody asks you about the square root of 7, don't answer. But when they ask you what your favorite Shakespeare play is, you probably should answer. Right? And so these kinds of things are very interesting, but they actually teach us just as much about people as they do about machines. So as you can probably guess, the fourth square is where we will end up in this course. And the modern approach to AI, broadly speaking, has been to build systems that act rationally. That means we focus on the decisions systems make, and rationally here, means optimally. We build systems that act optimally. And that brought in, from initially a logical logicist tradition, this brought in a whole history of optimization theory and let us tap into a whole bunch of new kinds of statistics and optimization and data that have really been important in making progress in AI. So you saw the word rational here a couple times. Rational means something informally, right? Informally, when we talk about rationality, we mean sort of, maybe something about like unemotional. But when we talk about rational in this course, we mean something very specific and technical. We mean it's a system that maximally achieves some predefined goals. It's not about what those goals are, right? You can have a robot that's designed to clean up dirt as well as possible. You might call it a vacuum cleaner. You can have another robot that's designed to make things as messy as possible. I don't know what you call that. Call it a pet dog or something. And those two things might both be rational if they're optimally achieving the goals that they have set for them. So rationality only concerns the decisions that are being made, not the thought process behind them. There can be many ways to get to a correct decision. You could get there through computation, through looking at data, past experiences. And those goals are always going to be expressed in terms of the utility of different outcomes. You're in a situation, you have some actions you can take, it'll affect the world in some possibly unknown way, and then you have utilities over the results. We'll unpack all of this during the rest of the lecture. But being rational, in a nutshell, is maximizing your expected utility. So this is an introduction to artificial intelligence. It would probably be better if we titled this course Computational Rationality. That's more like what we're going to talk about. But probably half of you wouldn't be here today. So we keep the title. So if you take one thing from this course, if you're going to get a CS188 tattoo, which I am not endorsing, it would be something like this. Maximize your expected utility. It's a good lesson for life, but it's also really going to be the rest of this course. We're going to take our time unpacking these words, right? What does maximize mean? What are we maximizing over? What are the algorithms for finding optimal things in that sense? What is utility? What are we trying to achieve? What is the expectation here? How does our uncertainty over the environment, the current state of the world, and the consequences of our actions enter into things? So we're going to unpack this slide for a whole semester. All right. I think one more thing, and then I'm going to get Pieter back on the stage here. What about the brain? So like I said, AI is really hard, but we have an existence proof of an intelligent system. There are 700 of them in this room right now. So why aren't we done? Why haven't we reverse engineered this? Well, one, brains are very good at making rational decisions, but they're not perfect, and you can get distracted by their limitations. But really, the main issue is that brains aren't modular like software. We can't pull bits out and look at them and see what they do and put them back in and replicate them and follow that kind of modularity. To the extent that brains are modular, it doesn't look like software modularity, not in a way that we've been able to exploit. There's a famous saying that brains are into intelligence as wings are to flight. People spend a long time trying to get mechanical flight to work. And we had existence proofs. We had birds. And one of the key things that made it possible to start getting automated flight was when we stopped trying to make them flap their wings. Right? So sometimes you want to follow the existence proof, and sometimes you want to build things differently because there's something about the engineering context which changes those assumptions. But that doesn't mean we haven't learned anything from the brain, and we certainly have a ton more to learn from the brain. There are a couple of things we learned from the brain. One of the main ones is that there's really two components to making good decisions. Remember, that's what AI is going to be about, making good decisions in a context. One is memory, data. You can make a good decision because you remember your experiences in the past, or an advantage humans have is remembering reading about other people's experiences, so you don't actually have to make all the mistakes yourself. So, for example, one reason I might not touch that fire is I've done that before and it didn't go well, so I'm not going to do it again. Another way to make good decisions is simulation, which is basically computation. Unrolling the consequences of your actions according to a model, what's going to happen next, and playing what if in your head so that you can think through the consequences of things without actually trying them. So maybe I don't touch that fire because I can sort of play it forward in my head and realize this is going to end poorly based on my model of how things work. And of course, for humans, those things are all sort of intermeshed. That model came from data and experiences. And so in this class, one of the things we're going to do is talk a lot about both how these two ways of making decisions are different and also about how to interleave them as we get further into the course. So to look sort of at this course broadly and think about what are you guys going to go through for the next semester, well, the first part is really about getting intelligence or smart behavior emerging from computation. So we're going to think about search, satisfying constraints, thinking about uncertainty and adversariality in the world. And this is going to be about algorithms that through computation take a situation and figure out something smart to do. So that the smart behavior comes from algorithms, from computation. The second part of the course is going to be about making good decisions and having intelligence on the basis of data and statistics. And this is where machine learning comes in. Here are all your experiences. Here's a new situation. How should you act on the basis of what you've seen previously? And of course, then we'll be able to interleave these things as we get further into the course. And as we go throughout this course, we're going to talk about applications. What are you actually going to do with all of this, all of these methods and all of this intelligent behavior? Think about things like natural language and vision and robotics and games. So I think Pieter's going to come and tell you a little bit about what's happened story so far in AI.
So let's take a step back and think about the first time some people really started working on AI. And this is actually back in the 50s. And the reason it started then is because that's when people started building computers. And initially, computers were thought of largely as just big calculators. But some people started thinking of it as if you can do calculations on numbers, maybe you can do calculations on other things, and start building something that thinks. And so let's watch a video from the early 60s reflecting on the progress that was made in the 50s with these early computers and early ideas.
Russian into English. Instead of mathematical wizardry, a sentence in Russian is to be said in...
One of the first non-numerical applications of computers, it was hyped as the solution to the Cold War obsession of keeping tabs on what the Russians were doing. Claims were made that the computer would replace most human translators.
At present, of course, you're just in the experimental stage. When you go in for full-scale production, what will the capacity be?
We should be able to do about, with a modern commercial computer, about 1 to 2 million words an hour. And this will be quite an adequate speed to cope with the whole output of the Soviet Union in just a few hours computer time a week.
When do you hope to be able to achieve this speed?
If our experiments go well, then perhaps within 5 years or so.
And finally, Mr. McDaniel, does this mean the end of human translators?
I would say yes for translators of scientific and technical material, but as regards poetry and novels, no, I don't think we'll ever replace the translators of that type of material.
Mr. McDaniel, thank you very much.
All right, so this is dated 1961. Let's take a look at the history of things that were being worked on at the time. 40s and 50s were the very early days. One of the first things people did was build a Boolean circuit model inspired by the brain. Turing wrote his Computing Machinery and Intelligence book, and Turing test started to exist. Then, a lot of excitement. Early AI programs play checkers, do some theorem proving, could do reasoning about geometry. The name artificial intelligence was coined in 1956. And then in 1965, a complete algorithm came about for logical reasoning. So a lot of excitement, a lot of progress was being made, and people thought this was going to move very fast. just like you saw in this video, they said, oh, maybe in 5 years we'll have machine translation solved. We're 55 years later, and we're maybe starting to get there. So very optimistic views. From there, transition to knowledge-based approaches. So people thought of, okay, we have these engines that can do logical theory improving, reasoning, and so forth. If we can just put enough knowledge, enough facts together, and fact one implies fact two, those kind of propositions, then maybe that allows us to reason about anything in the future and start putting more and more information in these systems. But it didn't lead where people hoped for. In fact, things didn't work as well as hoped for at all. Not much money was made with AI, not much progress was made anymore along these lines. And this kind of settled in an AI winter, where very little work happened on AI in industry, and very little funding from government would go to research labs that tried to work in AI. Then, in the 90s, there was a resurgence through statistical approaches, where there was a lot of combining of new statistical ideas with subfield expertise, leading to ability to reason about uncertainty and maybe an AI spring. And then 2012 onwards, deep learning started to come on the scene quite a lot. And people got just as excited again, it seems, as they were back in the 50s and 70s. And I guess we'll see if the cycle after repeats or not. But one fundamental difference right now is that AI is used in many, many industries. And we'll give you some examples in the remainder of this lecture of many application domains where AI is already useful and can be expected to be even more useful in the foreseeable future. Okay, so every lecture, about halfway through, we're going to take a 2-minute break, which is going to happen right now. And then after the break, we'll start discussing what AI can do today. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So, let's take a look at what AI can do, and let's do it through a quiz. So we'll do a raise of hands for each one of these questions and see what you think, and then we'll see what we think and go from there. So which of the following can be done at present by an AI? Play a decent game of table tennis. Who thinks that's possible? Raise your hand. Okay, yeah, about half of you. Well, let's reveal. Indeed. I mean, it might depend on what you call decent. You're not going to have a robot running around the table, but a robot that quietly plays back and forth with you is definitely available at this point.
We already talked about this, but how about play a decent game of Jeopardy? Yep, absolutely. So you might worry here that the computers are going to take all of our game shows from us. So far, that hasn't happened.
How about driving safely up a mountain road? Raise your hands. So this actually happened in 2011. So this is a done thing under certain conditions and so forth, but it's happened.
Right. What about drive safely along Telegraph Avenue? Yeah, I don't know if I can drive safely on Telegraph Avenue. But this is actually really important. We'll give it a question mark. Autonomous driving is getting better and better, but this goes to prove that just because you can do an initial step of a technology doesn't mean that once you get to real-world conditions and complex environments and high safety standards that you can still do that in an autonomous way.
How about buying a week's worth of groceries on the web? Yeah, this is easy now. I mean, the computer just has to use Instacart and everything will show up.
What about buy a week's worth of groceries at the Berkeley Bowl? It's a lot harder, right? It's packed. You got to make sure you don't bump your cart into other people, and then you got to distinguish 73 varieties of apple, and it's tricky, right? I give this one a no. I can't send a robot to go do my Berkeley Bowl shopping yet.
How about discovering and proving a new mathematical theorem? Okay, so a small number of people think this might be possible. We're giving it a question mark. AI is becoming pretty decent at proving things. If you give it a statement, it might figure out how to start from some actions to get to whether that statement is true or not. But the big question then still is, what should it try to prove? So many things to prove. 5 plus 7 is 12. 5 plus 8 is 13. So many things. And so when is it going to really decide what is worth proving and building abstractions around is a whole other question.
How about converse successfully with another person for an hour? Can we do this? Okay. I would say it depends greatly on the person, but not in general. So there's a whole history of computers basically bluffing, and chatbots for a while can bluff, and sooner or later you figure out that you're either talking to a computer or this conversation's deeply weird in some other way.
How about performing a surgical operation? Okay, so keep your hands up if you say yes. Okay. Now, continue to keep your hand up if you're happy to have a robot do open heart surgery on you. Couple of you, we do surgical robotics research in my lab. I'd love to find a few more participants. I'll see you after lecture. Not really at this point. The surgeries that do happen with a robot tend to happen through a human operator still teleoperating the robot to get the surgery done.
What about translate spoken Chinese into spoken English in real time? Yep, all the pieces of this actually work pretty well, at least under sort of limited contexts and circumstances.
How about folding laundry and putting away the dishes? Okay, yeah. I mean, I think the mixed answer is pretty accurate in that there is some pretty cool initial results starting to do this, but it's nowhere near the level that you can just get a robot at home that's going to do this for you.
What about writing an intentionally funny story? So, one fun thing about this lecture is we can more or less keep the same list, and over time, things just move from one column to the other as AI begins to be able to do these things better and better. That said, this is a case where we still can't write intentionally funny stories. Now, the key word there is actually intentionally. So let me give you some examples of what this means. And not just examples, but what it says about how we need to approach AI and what's going to work and what's not. So let's go back in time to 1984. This is a very famous system from Roger Schenck called the tailspin system. It would basically have a bunch of characters. They're all like animal, sort of anthropomorphized animal characters, and objects, and it would create stories by sort of chaining things together. And let's see the kinds of things that it comes up with. So here's a tailspin story. One day Joe Bear was hungry. He asked his friend Irving Bird where some honey was. Irving told him there was a beehive in the oak tree. Joe walked to the oak tree. He ate the beehive. The end. So this is funny, but there's like a glasses 90% full, glasses 10% empty kind of thing going on here. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, what the heck's going on here? The bear's eating the beehive. It's ridiculous. There's actually like a lot that's right here. Think about how much is right here. He's hungry. He wants some food. The right kind of food for a bear is honey. So he goes and asks, and the honey comes in the beehive that's over the oak tree. So he has to go to the oak tree. It's all great until the end. Like one missing link, which is you have to take the honey out of the beehive first. That's it. One missing link and the whole thing falls apart. And this was actually the story of a major failure case of technologies of sort of from this era of AI in the 80s, is you try to like write down all the knowledge and you write down all the rules, and all it takes is one missing link in the chain and you get crazy stuff. See some more crazy stuff. Henry Squirrel was thirsty. He walked over to the riverbank where his good friend Bill Bird was sitting. Henry slipped and fell in the river. Gravity drowned. The end. I mean, it's a surprise ending, right? So what's wrong here? Again, like a lot of the pieces are here, right? It's thirsty, and then there's water, and then, I mean, there's this drowning event. What went wrong here was actually linguistic, right? I mean, it'd still be a weird story if, who is this, Henry drowned? But here, gravity drowned. What went wrong? The system knows there's a drowning, and that's appropriate because there's water, and it knows that there's sort of a Henry drowns and that gravity does the drowning, but it sort of like dropped the wrong argument.
I think what it means is gravity drowned Henry, but of course they just drowned Henry because it thinks those are just the objects.
Yeah, so exactly. What's gone wrong here is linguistic. There's two arguments, and it's dropped the wrong one. That's all it takes. In the first one, there's a missing sort of reasoning chain about containers. Here, there's a missing sort of linguistic rule on how to render it. Crazy pants stories. Let's see another one. Once upon a time, there was a dishonest fox and a vain crow. One day, the crow was sitting in his tree holding a piece of cheese in his mouth. He noticed that he was holding the piece of cheese. He became hungry and swallowed the cheese. The fox walked over to the crow. The end. Like, it's like fine, except there's this long digression about the cheese, and that has nothing to do with the story. So there's nothing really like ill-formed here. You can follow the story. The language sort of makes it clear what's going on, but there's something sort of wrong with, this is not how stories are structured. You don't rat hole about this cheese that you discover in your mouth if you're trying to tell a story about a fox walking over to the crow. So there's all these levels of things going on and all these different kinds of abstractions you have to get right, and any one of those things having a missing link, and you get unintentionally funny stories. Now, you might think that we've had a lot of progress now. We have data-driven methods. We have more compute. We have big computers. We have neural nets. Maybe we can write intentionally funny things. Not yet. So here, I think this is a hysterical example. This is from Janelle Shane, who does a lot of these kinds of trained neural nets. She's responsible for the paint colors as well. She trained a neural net on a bunch of what do you get when you cross X and Y kinds of jokes. Let me read you some of them if you can see them. What do you get when you cross a dog and a vampire? a bungee? Yeah, it doesn't really land. How about, what do you get when you cross a street and a bungee with a cow? A bungee and a pig with a cow. So, like, we still can't actually either tell the intentionally funny stories or the intentionally not funny stories. Weird stuff happens, whatever you try to do. And in fact, one of the things that we've learned as a field sometimes the right thing to do is know your limitations. So, at least at times, if you've asked Siri, for example, to tell me a story, maybe it's better to not try. So there are a bunch of areas of AI where we're making incredible progress, and there's a bunch of areas where we're not. And understanding where progress is being made and what walls we're going to hit can be very hard, because sometimes things you were sure were really, really hard, like Go, turn out to have solutions today. And other things that you're sure you're like almost there, and you're not. And it's really tricky. So what I'm going to do now is start talking about some individual areas of AI and the kinds of problems people work on. And of course, for each of these problems, they get better and better every year. But the overall sort of decomposition of the world into different kinds of problems that interact in certain ways tends to be relatively stable. So I'm going to talk about some. Peter's going to come and talk about some of the others. And let's see what we can learn. We'll unpack a lot of this during the rest of the course. A lot of the application stuff will come at the end of the course. So natural language, this is actually the area where I work, is a bunch of kinds of technologies that deal with different aspects of how humans communicate with each other and therefore with computers under appropriate circumstances. So, for example, speech recognition is taking the sounds that somebody says and mapping them onto basically text. Not necessarily understanding that text, but transcribing it. Text-to-speech synthesis is the opposite. It's going from something you want to say to a WAV file that embodies that speech verbally. These are two areas which have undergone amazing progress in the past 5 to 10 years. A lot of that's been neural nets, but actually even before that, a lot of that was just large data methods applied appropriately. There's also dialogue systems, which would sort of fit in between. When you say something to a system, what if it's going to actually formulate a response and say something back? This technology is nowhere near as far along. This is something that we're still figuring out how to do, how to build a system that you can have a meaningful, sustained conversation with. Okay, but let me give you an example on the text-to-speech front of the kinds of things that go into it and how we are and aren't able to do a good job of it today. So this is an automatic transcription system. There have been big advances. The state-of-the-art systems are better than this today, but I think it's a good example. Okay, let me go back to here. This is the important part. So, friends, family, classmates said their final goodbyes yesterday. Goodbyes like Best Buy here. Something's gone wrong. And the way we think about speech recognition systems is there's a part of doing speech recognition which is linking up the sounds to the kind of phonemic units of the language. So figuring out that with all that noise present, the person said something that sounds like bye, that's the domain of the acoustic model. That's actually something we're extremely good at and have only gotten better at in recent times. The mistake here is not actually an acoustic mistake. It does sound like goodbyes. It's just the wrong kind of bye. And the way you know that is contextual. And that context of what words, even if they sound the same, are appropriate in this context, that's the domain of language modeling. And that's something that we are not as good at. It's a much harder problem because the amount of context that you bring when you do speech recognition is vast. And it's been very hard to capture that. With modern methods, we've been able to do a better job, but that's still the challenging part in speech recognition systems. So that's speech technologies, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens in natural language. For example, question answering, which you can think of Watson as a case of this, but in general, you want to be able to ask a question of maybe a structured database or maybe the web or maybe something in between like Wikipedia and get an answer back. That's different than search, where they say, here's a bunch of documents, good hunting. Say, here's your answer. Right? I've compared a bunch of sources. This is the answer. This is a different problem. Machine translation. Remember back to C3PO? How many of you use Google Translate or something like that regularly? How about ever? Let's go for ever. All right. How many of you think it works well for your purposes? Okay. I think it depends on the language pair. It depends on the kind of thing you're translating. It depends on your standards. Like if you have no idea what that Chinese text means and now suddenly you can more or less muddle your way through the English translation, it's a lot better than the original. Sometimes machine translation, like between similar languages like English and French, can work amazing. It depends on the amount of data, the difference between the language, the amount of compute you put into it, a whole bunch of different kinds of contextual factors. But machine translation works pretty well. Remember that video? Remember in the 50s when they were like, yeah, we're about one experiment away from solving machine translation? Yeah, it took 50 plus years, and we're still not done, right? But that sort of feeling like, oh yeah, we're going to do it, and like maybe there will still be poets, that kind of feeling, that's just like the kind of thing that people say when you're at this part of the S-curve and you don't think there's the other part of the S-curve. We don't know where we are in the S-curve right now. We know that sooner or later there's going to be limitations and that we're going to need new technologies to get past them, or maybe just new scale, maybe more compute. But we don't know where we are on that S-curve right now. So we have to be careful. It is the case that machine translation kind of works now, and it didn't work at all back then. I mean, think back up there in the 50s, the computers they have, those supercomputers, right? Your phone has more power. Your toaster has more power than a supercomputer from the 50s. And all it could do was look up words. Now we have better methods, but they're still not perfect. And a whole bunch of other stuff falls under the domain of natural language. Web search, understanding how what your query relates to what's on the page and mixing that with things like link analysis, or the big thing now is clickstream data about what people do and don't end up using and clicking on. Text classification, spam filtering, there's a whole bunch of things that basically anchor into natural language and analysis of natural language. Mapping natural language from one thing to another works a whole lot better than understanding it deeply today. Going to hand it to Pieter.
Another very important thing for an AI is to understand what's around it. And so this field is often called computer vision or perception. And what it comes down to is that you somehow want to take in pixel values, which is just numbers, red, green, blue values of what's in that pixel, and then say something about what's there. For example, in computer vision, people will study the problem of face detection and face recognition, which is actually starting to work really well, and a lot of companies are putting this to use today. Semantic scene segmentation, where you look at a scene, picture on the left, and turn it into the understood scene on the right, which you then might feed into a control system for your car. Or 3D understanding. So what we have here, the color corresponds to depth, and so we see 3D understanding of what's going on in that scene and also isolating out the people. Let's go back to Terminator. So this is from Terminator 2. If you haven't watched it, it's recommended. Not for the class, just for free time. Scan mode, motorcycle, car, motorcycle. Okay, so that's the movies. Now let's take a look at a real computer vision system. Cat, frog, fox, Dalmatian, bulldog, frog, terminate frog. Okay, so the real computer vision system is starting to catch up with some of the sci-fi things, but not that it's a fully solved problem just yet. Now, once you have a vision system, you can start making decisions based on what you see around you in the world, and maybe you can have a robot actually do things in the world. Now, with robotics, there's many components. Part of it is mechanical engineering. You need to build a system. Part of it is AI. And a big thing to keep in mind is that working in the real world is a lot harder than working in simulation. And so a lot of the challenges in robotics tie into the big challenge in how to get something working in the real world. It's across many, many verticals. Could be vehicles, rescue robots, flying robots, soccer, and so forth. In this class, we're going to focus on the AI side of things, but keep in mind, somebody needs to do the mechanical engineering work to build these robots too, and there's a lot of advances to be made there too. So let's look at some examples. So people have built robots. Can we lower the volume a little bit? Here. So this is a lot like kindergartners playing soccer. But things do happen. Now, think back to optimizing your expected utility, rational decision making. What do you think it means when you're a robot dog and you're asked to kick a ball? This is reinforcement learning in action for you. We'll see reinforcement learning later. Here is a view from a self-driving car. This is Waymo footage. So it has many sensors. The LiDAR, which is a laser range-finding system, sends out laser beams and then measures how long it takes for that laser beam to reflect back, multiplies that time with the speed of light, and decides how far away something is. It's also radar measuring distance, but that doesn't get the same resolution, but has the upside of not being as susceptible to weather conditions. And then, of course, cameras. And the feed from the cameras gets processed to understand the traffic conditions, specificities. That's not just in geometry, for example, the lights, the crossings, where the other cars are. And then a really important problem beyond that is to also understand what will these other cars do in the near future? Anticipate that so you can do the right thing, anticipating what they will do rather than just based where everybody is now. Here is a robot that actually lives on the 7th floor of Siddhartha Dai Hall here at Berkeley. And this robot is actually organizing laundry. It's only if you have towels. The video is sped up 200 times. So maybe only if you have 5 towels. But if you have 5 towels, this works really well. And actually, another interesting point here is that a lot of the work on this project was done by Berkeley undergraduate researchers. So if you enjoyed this class, talk to Dan and me, but also look on the Berkeley AI web pages. The listing of faculty, a lot of us get undergraduate researchers involved, and there's a lot of cool projects to be done. And of course, at some point, these robots get tired of doing laundry. Also, this one looks a lot like Terminator, but with only one red flashing eye. And so we've seen robots take over our board games, our video games, our quizzes, and now our workouts. Back to you, Dan.
I don't know how I can follow soccer puppies, but I'm going to talk a little bit, we alluded before, to game playing. So there's actually a really long history, more than we can get into today, but we'll unpack some of it later in the course, about computers playing games. You remember in that video, even in the 50s, computers were starting to do things like play simple games like checkers, right? And of course they got better at those games, but even just being able to play the game, know the rules, encode it, pick a move, was impressive in the 50s. Computers got better and better. One of the most famous moments in AI history was in 1997 when Deep Blue played and defeated Kasparov, who was the human world champion at chess. So there was this moment when this giant refrigerator of a computer, which could do at the time 200 million board positions per second. That was like unheard of back then. Now it's like desktop speed. And could just kind of number crunch, churn, dig through the search tree to think about what moves to make. And what was interesting is this gameplay was described as intelligent, creative play. People understood the moves, even though as far as we know, that's absolutely not how humans play chess. But the same kinds of moves and strategies sort of came out of the combinatorial structure of the game. Of course, you can do now, like I said before, the same with kind of commodity parts. I think a revealing thing, not about AI, but about humans, was in 96 when Kasparov beat Deep Blue, but Deep Blue put up a fight. Kasparov said, I could feel, I could smell a new kind of intelligence across the table. I don't know what intelligence smells like, but in 1997, Deep Blue beat Kasparov, and Kasparov said, Deep Blue hasn't proven anything. So maybe that's a more comment on humans, but there are open questions here, like how does human cognition, how do we deal with this giant combinatorial space? We probably don't deal in the same way, but we come up with similar kinds of solutions. How can humans compete at all? Like, we don't try to compete with computers on taking the square root of numbers. Like, that's just not a thing we compete on. But this is something where we're like surprisingly evenly matched. It's really interesting. Other things since, in 2016, this is 20 years later, AlphaGo beating Lee Sedol. This is a huge advance. People used to say, okay, checkers, yeah, that's done. Chess, that's done. Systems are getting better and better, but we're just so far from playing humans at Go. Because Go is this huge, giant combinatorial space. The branching factor is so high, the depth of the tree is so big that we just couldn't conceive of computation not being bogged down in the exponential growth there. But people came up with methods to sort of do these sparse rollouts, combine that with machine learning, combine that with self-play, neural nets, and suddenly what seemed impossible actually made huge advances. Right now, like maybe even like right now, within an hour or two, maybe right this minute, there is a competition between OpenAI's 5 and Team Pain, which are human pros at Dota 2. And there are some caveats here, like it's not entirely the same setup. They have access to slightly different information. But again, this is a case where there's surprisingly even match, and we'll see what happens. One comment from the first match, which the humans won, go Team Human, was that the AI play was actually kind of completely different than how humans play. Like they sort of like twitch around a little bit, but then do sort of weird strategies, but execute them incredibly well. It's a little bit different than how humans play. And we'll see what happens. There's 2 more matches they're going to unfold. But again, like surprising progress on games. So I know this makes me happy or sad as somebody who likes video games. Like, well, I guess computers can play my video games for me. But the good news is, for at least Dota, if you're in like the top 0.001% of players, you can still beat the computer for like the next month. Okay. So, computers can play your video games for you. They can go to the gym for you. Turns out they can also probably do your math homework for you. There's a long tradition, like I said earlier, about logical inference. That's one of the earliest places that AI was applied. And we still have a lot of progress in real systems in theorem proving. Also, these logical methods are used for things like fault diagnosis, cases where you need to really be able to trace through what the computer is doing. There's a big issue with machine learning overall, is often the computer does well, but you can't tell when it makes mistakes or what's gone wrong or why it made the decision it made. And this has lots of consequences. But people have made lots of progress in logical systems taken very broadly. One particular place where there's been a ton is in satisfiability solvers, which are used for all kinds of things. And maybe, as Pieter said earlier, one of the biggest things that's going on is AI is kind of everywhere now, right? It's not just chess and checkers, right? Applied AI automates all kinds of things. In some ways, it's the glue or the electricity, as people say, of a lot of modern business. So, of course, search engines, but also all that route planning, maps, traffic, logistics, things like medical diagnosis, help desks being automated, spam and fraud detection, all the intelligence in your camera, in your thermostat, all of that is kind of increasingly being driven by AI to give you smarter devices, product recommendations, and sort of increasingly much. So not only is AI doing more, not only can we do more, but we can do more kinds of things. We still can't build one system that can sort of do a little bit of everything. We build systems for each individual task. But there are a lot of tasks that we can improve with AI augmentation now. So, what are we going to do in this course? Quick recap, and we'll give you a demonstration to end the day here. We're going to be talking about designing rational agents. That's an agent that perceives and acts. So think about this little guy here trying to get that apple down. The abstraction, it's a very important abstraction, is that you have an agent and you have an environment. You control the agent, you don't control the environment. So what comes into the agents are percepts from the sensors. What goes out of the agents are actions from the actuators. And the question mark in the middle, that's the agent's behavior. It's the agent function. That's what we write in this class. We write the decision-making procedures that map from what you perceive to what you do. The environment responds. You might not know how. We're going to have to build that into our algorithms. So we talked about these characteristics, and that's what this course is about. Lots of different techniques for different kinds of conceptualization of the boundary between agent and environment. We're going to see a lot of examples of agents and environments and where that boundary is set. When you drive, it's your eyes and your hands that are basically the boundary, but if you're an autonomous car, it's the camera and the control lines into the wheels.
Something you may not have thought of as an agent is Pac-Man. So we're going to see a lot of Pac-Man in this course. Hopefully you all recognize Pac-Man. Has anybody never played Pac-Man? Good. Okay. If you have never played Pac-Man, but you're too embarrassed to admit it, go play a game of Pac-Man on 188. Pac-Man is an agent. Its sensors perceive the state of the world, which is the kind of the labeling of all the dots and ghost positions and all of that. Its actuators are like a little joystick, up, down, left, right. And then the environment is the ghosts, and who knows what they'll choose to do, and how the world will evolve. So we're going to show you, to close out the day here. You want to come join? You will build this soon. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to think about, this is going to be Pac-Man. My hands are off the keyboard. This is being played by an algorithm. So this is going to be behavior that appears to be intelligent, deriving from, who knows? You're going to build it, but start thinking today, what's going on here in the agent function? What computations give rise to this kind of behavior? Do you want to do the honors?
Sure.
All right, so there he goes.
All right.
Yeah, so we're out of time today.
See you next week. Bye.